Welcome, everyone. Welcome to today's JewishGen Talk. We're so glad that you're here. We'll get started in about 2 minutes. And we are very happy you're here. You can leave a note in the chat where you are logging in from. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's JewishGen Talk. We're so glad that you're here. You can leave a note in the chat where you are logging in from, and we'll get started in a couple of moments. Here's Sarah Weil from Jerusalem. Hope you're doing okay. Lily and Tanzer from Beaver Creek, Ohio. Ellen Ryan, Bob Arnold from Ontario, Canada. Scott Mandel from St. Petersburg, and he says hello to his cousin Ellen.
Hi.
Gail Justman, volunteer, thank you. We have Ilona Abinezer from Jerusalem. Marcy Truss from Gaithersburg, Maryland. Myra Schwartz from, I'm not sure, where is that from? Anybody read that? Beja, California, Sur, Mexico?
Baja, California.
Baja, California.
Wow.
Baja, California.
Fredericksburg.
We have someone from Tamarack, Florida. I think that's Sandra. Okay, we're going to get started. Welcome everybody who's here. My name is Avram Grohl, and I'm privileged to oversee JewishGen, which is the Jewish Genealogy Research Division of the Museum of Jewish Heritage, which is based in Lower Manhattan in New York City. We are glad today to be joined by experts from the Shapell Manuscript Foundation and from JewishGen, Ellen Kowitt, who oversees the USA Research Division, who is going to run this webinar. Just by way of introduction, we are very mindful of the situation that is happening in Israel, and our thoughts and prayers are with our collective family in Israel. I was actually corrected by somebody a couple of weeks ago. I asked him if he had any family in Israel, and he said, sure, about 8 million. So I think it's important for us to bear in mind that everything we do, we are keeping them in mind. And to that end, we first of all appreciate all of the donations that you made in support of this webinar. And we are going to be donating 100% of those proceeds to the Barzilai Medical Center, which is located in Ashkelon, which is in the south of Israel, right near the front lines. So we appreciate all of your support. This presentation will be recorded, so you can listen to it again in case you have to drop off. And also for anybody who has not been able to make it, we'll be able to promote later on. We'll put it on our JewishGen YouTube channel. Our friends at Shapell have put together a very extensive and helpful handout, which we will send out when we have the video loaded to our YouTube channel. We'll send out a link along with the handout. If you have any questions, you could please post them in the Q&A section, and we will be glad to go through as many questions as we possibly can towards the end of the program. We're aiming to end at around 3 o'clock, but we can definitely go over if there are a lot of questions that are coming in. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Ellen Kowitt, who directs the JewishGen's USA Research Division, who will introduce our speakers and get the program started. So thanks all for being here. Ellen?
Thank you, Avrami. Welcome, everyone. I'm Ellen Kowitt, and we are very excited today to introduce you to the Shapell Roster, now available on JewishGen. Some of you might have been involved in hearing the webinar a year or so ago that we did in looking at American military resources for Jews. And a couple of the faces on this call may be familiar. They participated at the time. And the Shapell Roster is not brand new. It was launched a year or so ago, and they have their own website. But what's different now is that it's searchable through JewishGen. So if you were to search the unified search on JewishGen, putting in a name that also appears on the Shapell Roster, those results would show up in your JewishGen results. So this is mainly what we're introducing, but we are going to give an overview of the Shapell Roster of Jewish service in the Civil War, You have all of these great experts here that you can tap into their knowledge. So I'm very pleased to introduce Alexandra Apito, who is a researcher on the Shapell roster. She began working on the roster in 2013 as an on-site researcher at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. She specializes in Civil War military records and genealogy. Alex has a Bachelor of Science in Historic Preservation and Art and Architectural History, as well as a Master of Science in Historic Preservation from Roger Williams University in Bristol, Rhode Island. Her past employers include the Preservation Society of Newport County in Newport, Rhode Island, where she was a manager of the Breakers Mansion, the summer cottage of the Vanderbilt family. She has also interned at the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem, Massachusetts. She currently lives in Salem, Massachusetts, with her architect husband, Brian, a 3-year-old daughter, Elliot, and a newborn son, Martin. They love exploring cities and looking at architecture together. Welcome, Alex. Adrienne Dearmas, director of the Shapell roster, brings 25 plus years of experience in primary source research, database and digital asset management, a passion for storytelling via exhibitions, books, and websites. She has an MA in Museum Studies from George Washington University and a BA in Anthropology from Emory University. She brings all of this to this new and exciting digital history resource. Her previous clients and employers include the Smithsonian Institution, the Historical Society of Washington, D.C., and Time magazine. Adrienne currently lives in a 1903 farmhouse located 90 miles west of Washington, D.C. The property was once part of Lord Thomas Fairfax's Virginia land grant, which dates back to the mid-1600s. In 1748, Lord Fairfax gave a young man named George Washington his first job to survey his lands. While she doesn't argue when people say George Washington must have walked on her property, she is quick to point out that she's never seen documentation to prove it. Good luck with that. Welcome, Adrienne. Caitlin Winkler is a researcher for the Shapell roster. She joined the project in 2012, straight out of law school as an on-site researcher at the National Archives, fulfilling the team's quota for a resident Civil War nerd and an actual Jew. Caitlin has a JD from Washington and Lee University and a BA in Historic Preservation from the University of Mary Washington. She previously interned with the National Trust for Historic Preservation and the Land Trust of Virginia before she parlayed her legal research skills into the life of history detective work. Caitlin currently lives in Cheyenne, Wyoming, with her Air Force pilot husband, Derek, and their daughters, Clara and Vivian. She is an avid horsewoman, as well as an obsessive music fan and avowed Bruce Springsteen groupie. When not researching or child rearing, Caitlin spends as much time as she can at the barn or at concert venues. Welcome, Caitlin. And with that, I'm going to pass it over, I think, to Adrienne. Are you beginning first? And we'll get going. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Ellen. I appreciate that. All righty, here we go. All right. On behalf of the Shapell Manuscript Foundation, I want to thank Avraham, Ellen, and everyone at JewishGen for welcoming the Shapell roster into their collection of resources, and all of you for attending this presentation and joining us today. I'm Adrienne Dearmas. I am the director of the Shapell roster. And before we get into what the Shapell roster is and how it can be a useful genealogical resource, I want to talk briefly about the organization behind this endeavor. Benjamin Shapell established the Shapell Manuscript Foundation in 2005 as an independent educational organization dedicated to collecting and exhibiting original manuscripts and historical documents and objects. Today, it produces groundbreaking research, articles, exhibitions, documentary films, videos, and books, like Lincoln and the Jews by Dr. Jonathan Sarna and Benjamin Shapell, and most recently, Adam Mendelssohn's 2-volume set, Jewish Soldiers in the Civil War. Volume 1, which was published by NYU Press last year, focuses on the Union Army. Volume 2, which is currently being written, will focus on the Confederacy. Ben's passion for history is the driving force behind everything the foundation does. His carefully curated collection, more than 40 years in the making, spans 2 centuries and reveals the human side of history. His vision of a publicly accessible and historically accurate accounting of Jewish participation in the American Civil War is why we are here today. So, what is the Shapell Roster? In short, the Shapell Roster of Jewish Service in the American Civil War, that's its long title, is an ongoing reappraisal of the military service of Jews who served in the American Civil War as soldiers and sailors, and some other occupations. It is presented as a publicly accessible online database and as interpretive content in the form of scholarly articles on Shapell.org, social media posts, and video presentations like this. Our goal is to identify every Jewish soldier and sailor who served in the Civil War. Our process is to find primary source evidence of both military service and Judaism for each name in Simon Wolf's The American Jew as Patriot, Soldier, and Citizen, and I'll get back to that in a second, and the numerous names he omitted. Our purpose is to change the conversation from how many to a more personalized and in-depth story of Jewish participation in an extraordinary period in American history. So how did the idea for the Shapell Roster come to be? To answer that, we have to go back to 1895, when a Washington, D.C. based lawyer named Simon Wolf published a book called The American Jew as Patriot, Soldier, and Citizen. Written in response to a growing wave of general anti-Semitism and published allegations that Jews were not willing to fight for their country, it included more than 8,000 names of, purportedly, Jewish soldiers and sailors who served in the American Civil War. Since then, the general consensus among Jewish historians has been that if not every name in Wolf's roster was Jewish, that number was so small as to not be noteworthy. And yet, it proved to be an unreliable reference tool for, say, someone like Ben Shapell, who was building a collection that included Civil War-era manuscripts. In order to create a solid foundation for the future study of American Jewish history, Wolf's 19th century work needed a 21st century upgrade. To that end, we've determined that nearly 1,000 and counting of the names in Wolf's roster are definitively not Jewish. And we've added more than 1,500 names, also in counting, that he omitted. In August of 2022, the Shapell Roster went live with the records of Union soldiers and sailors. We are currently working on the Confederacy and will launch those at a later date. As you might imagine, it takes time to find the soldiers and sailors in the historical record, collect the documents, and populate each soldier page with the data we find. Given the results of the Civil War, you might not be surprised to learn that finding military records for all the Jewish Confederates is sometimes challenging. And to say that Wolf missed more Confederates than Union men is an understatement. 12% of the Union soldiers and sailors, in the Shapell Roster are names we've discovered. To date, 31% of the total number of Confederates we're working on were not in Wolf's roster. Speaking of numbers, allow me to address the most often asked question we receive. How many Jews served in the Civil War? Ellen, I think you've even asked me this question. The reality is the answer changes every day. Between new additions and finding new evidence that a name from Wolf was Jewish, the Shapell Roster is constantly being updated. How do we do what we do? Carefully and collaboratively. We have 2 mandates: obtain proof of military service and evidence a soldier was Jewish. As I'm sure everyone in the audience knows all too well, some resources are better than others. People often ask us what our favorite resource is, and we all agree. For military service, the records at the National Archives. For proving someone was Jewish, descendants. Once we accomplish that, we collect the following data for each soldier and sailor, if it's available: date and location for birth and death, marriage, residence, and occupation details, the connections, if any, between him and other individuals in the database, and historical documents that prove insight into his life before, during, and after the war. Much more than a military roll of honor, the Shapell Roster soldier pages contain the carefully collected details of their lives and our favorite feature, the connections between them. Whether they married a fellow soldier's sister, maintained a lifelong friendship with someone they once shared a tent with, or served with their brothers, fathers, and cousins. After more than a decade of being immersed in their lives, I can tell you that not every one of them left footprints in the historical record. But when they did, we found them to be brave heroes and cowardly deserters, pillars of their communities and criminals. And while some died much too young, many others were celebrated centenarians. Getting to know each and every one of them has been a privilege and a pleasure, as is being here with you today. So thank you. And now I'm going to turn it over to Caitlin and Alex, who will explain in way more detail how the search works and what kinds of information you can expect to find. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrienne. We are so excited to now be included on JewishGen. If you want to look to see if your ancestors in our database, you can now find out using the JewishGen Unified Search. Once you type your ancestor's name into the search bar, you can scroll down through the results and look for our logo to find the Shapell Roster of Jewish service in the Civil War. When you click on the JewishGen results, the search results page will open a new window in the Shapell Roster database. Select the record you want to open, and you will then be able to explore your ancestor soldier page. Our search results page features a number of additional display options that you can include to help identify your ancestor. If you click on the More Display Options button, you can include helpful fields like birth and death dates and even locations in your search results. This can help you navigate to the soldier you are looking for without having to open and scroll through dozens of records. Something that is a little different between JewishGen and the roster is that our name search does not have the option of a phonetic search. You must have an exact name match to retrieve a soldier's record. The good news is we record all the different name variations we've come across for a soldier in our database, including, but not limited to, names on death records, censuses, obituaries, regimental muster rolls, tombstones, signatures, you name it. Pictured here are all of the name variations included in one soldier's record. If you search on any of these name variations, you will find the soldier's page. Abraham Cohen, Abraham Cohn, they'll all work. But for example, if you were to search on the name Abraham Cohn, spelled C-O-N-E, this record would not come up. So if you are struggling to find a record, try different combinations of name variations, or try starting with surname only, then scroll through the search results. The way our integration is currently configured with JewishGen, middle names are not included, so please skip a middle name or a middle initial at this point. So looking to include a location in your search, the different JewishGen location searches include all of our location fields that we have in a soldier record. You can find soldiers who were born in a place, died in a place, or were enlisted, discharged, or had another service-related event in a specific place. A feature of our database we are really excited about is that you can choose to use a modern city or town name or its historical location. Our database includes both. So if your ancestor was born in Kempin, Posen, Prussia, which today is Kepno, Poland, you could search on Kempin or Kepno, Prussia or Poland, and your search would be successful. Our database's locations are not compatible with the region search dropdown on JewishGen for non-US based locations. Even if you only want to search on a country or kingdom, type it in the town field. If you would like to search generally on a US state, not in an individual municipality, however, you would select United States in the region dropdown and then the individual state. Also to note, especially with some of those fun European city names, you can search on location names in our data with or without the diacritical marks. If a place name includes punctuation, however, like a period or an apostrophe, leave that out. This goes for soldiers' names as well. I'm going to throw it over to Caitlin now.
Hi, everybody. So to recap, there are some minor technical differences between our data and JewishGen search engine. An additional JewishGen search field that is not configured to our database is the Any field option. So skip that when looking for Shapell Roster results. And not to worry, we will give you copies of today's slides so you can go back if you need help to craft your searches. Now that we've talked about how to access your ancestors' soldier page in our database, let's talk about why this is such exciting news. We have spent more than a decade amassing data and collecting documents from numerous different sources, many of which are not available online, to make them accessible to you all in one place. On a soldier's page, you will find not just his basic birth and death information, but his complete military service history, marriage and burial information when available, notes on your ancestors' connection to Judaism, notes on your ancestors' connection to other Jewish soldiers and sailors we have in the database, whether they were family, neighbors, comrades, etc. And finally, and most excitingly, primary source documents connected to your ancestor, like the examples on this slide. While we don't have photographs and personal letters for every soldier, we do have some documents available for most Union soldiers to help you personally connect to your ancestors' past. Many of these images were scanned by us at the National Archives and contain information and stories you won't find anywhere else. These images are free for you to download and keep. When we identify documents and images connected to our soldiers on paid websites, such as Ancestry and newspapers.com, we include citations for these documents so you can go find and access these additional images for yourself. Okay, so now we're going to give you a quick tour of Medal of Honor recipient David Urbanski's record so you can see all our efforts in action. As you can see, one of our records starts with a biography. Then the soldier's statuses showing he has been confirmed as Jewish and had Civil War service, and then his birth and death information. We go through all the name variations Urbanski was found under, then list all of Urbanski's military service during the Civil War. Finally, we get to the meat and potatoes of a soldier page for a genealogist. The documents and sources. For Urbanski, our notes include his marriage details, an explanation of his many name variations, and the evolution of his family's surname, and his burial information. His documents start with a recently acquired Shapell manuscript collection item that we are super excited to have, Urbanski's Carte de Visite. The Shapell Manuscript Foundation is in the process of making its collection items public and integrating them into our database. We want descendants and researchers to get access to and enjoy the artifacts the foundation has worked so hard to procure and preserve. So that's a soldier page in the Shapell roster. We don't have access to as many resources and documents for every soldier as we did with Urbanski, but you won't know what we have on your ancestor until you look. We hope all this information was helpful and encourages you to find your ancestors in the Shapell roster on JewishGen. And please reach out to us. We want to hear from you if you're a descendant and you found your ancestor. Let's talk about him. If you're a descendant and we don't have your ancestor, then we want to add him very badly. If you think you might be a descendant but are having trouble searching, we're here to help. Please email. Also, if you want to share items from your family's collection with us relating to your Civil War ancestor, we would be so honored. So, we love working with descendants to build out and improve our database. This was a very cursory overview of our records, For a more in-depth look, we have some pre-recorded videos on our YouTube channel you can watch to learn more. We will be including links to these videos in our handout as well to make it easy for you to check them out. Now we'd like to open the floor up for questions so we can hear from you about what you'd like to know more about.
Thank you, everyone. That was really wonderful. For anybody who has questions, please post them in the Q&A, and we will be happy to answer them.
Actually, I want to start with just some points to sort of discuss back and forth. I guess one big question would be when it might be estimated that Confederate Jewish soldiers will be added to the Shapell roster. And you're on mute, Adrienne.
Adrienne, you're muted.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I'll take that one. I would love to say in a year. I would love to say in 2 years. I have no way of knowing. What we are hoping to do, as I mentioned earlier, Adam Mendelsohn is working on the volume 2 of the 2-part series. And so it's kind of a dance where we're trying to get as much data into the database for him to access so that he can write the book. And then we will probably time the launch of the Confederate records in conjunction with the publication of the book. And since we don't know what NYU Press's timeline is for all of that, but I will say this, I feel like we will have a much better idea after the first of the year, so that we're all kind of working towards this December deadline to see what we've got. And so I might be able to answer that question in January.
I also want to add just that we are actively working on the Confederacy currently. That's what we're doing. So if someone in the audience has an ancestor that they currently can't access their record because they were Confederate and they're not live yet, please email us, because if we already have your ancestor, we may have already worked on their record and we can send you what we have already.
We're happy to share what we know and have now, whether you can access it on our database or not.
Right.
So yeah, definitely shoot us an email either way, just to make sure we have them, obviously. But then if we do, we would love to share what we have with you.
Absolutely.
I find it interesting, Adrienne, that you said Adam writes the book based on what you're all finding in your research. So for me, that kind of begs the question, is Adam separately then researching just community history, or how does his research complement the individual names that you're providing for this context of Jewish soldiers in the Confederacy?
So what we did with the Union book is Dr. Mendelsohn had access to the roster before it actually went live. And so based on what he was seeing, a lot of the statistical information that's in his book, he drew from the data that's in the roster. But he did his own research in terms of who he chose to talk about, what stories, etc. So I don't know. There's so much additional work that we need to do on the Confederacy. We had 10 years to work on the Union, and we just kept putting the Confederates off, and so I hope he gets what he needs. But so yeah, we're providing him with information like, oh, all of these people immigrated from this place in Europe, that type of thing. Or he looked at age relative to location. So, so there was just a lot of statistical data that he drew from, and how that gets represented in his books is entirely up to him. So we're trying to give him some numbers, basically.
Yeah, I think we're sort of giving him the statistics. If you have a copy of the Union book, you can flip to the back of the appendices, and those appendices are driven by our data. What he is writing is based on his own research.
Yes.
sometimes in our database using our data, sometimes not. And we do provide him when we find like interesting anecdotes or soldiers we think are fitting in with the narrative that he's writing. We try and forward those to him. If you read the Union book, a lot of the short anecdotes, soldier experiences and things like that, that all came from our research. But I mean, it is Adam's book and Adam's work. We're just sort of trying to give him that statistical foundation to use and interpret as part of his story. So,
Okay. And I mean, other than the obvious that the Confederacy lost, and so we all know that there were burned records and things that don't come to the National Archives. Perhaps records are kept more at the state level. Are there other challenges that you're finding with researching the Jews in the Confederacy?
yeah.
Do you have 2 hours? I'll leave that one for you guys. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I as you identified, obviously our biggest challenge is that with Union soldiers, their complete like muster roll driven service histories are all available at out of the National Archives in Washington, D.C. Those files are there, they're available, it's very easy to access. They're very complete with a few exceptions. In terms of the Confederate records, these files do exist at the National Archives for Confederate soldiers, but they are based on what muster rolls were extant at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, when the federal government sent word down to all the formerly Confederate states, hey, we want these records. And then what the states were willing to send back. And as Ellen mentioned, we have burning, we have losing, we have, all those things. Like they were on the run entirely. Their record keeping in general, I would say, was not great. It was not great if you start going through their files and
I often say if you don't have shoes or food, record keeping is usually not on the top of your priority.
It's low down on the list. So we have really incomplete files, you're lucky if your guy happened to be on the one muster roll that survived from the 7th Infantry. And if he wasn't, he doesn't mean he didn't serve in that regiment. It just means we don't have any official record that he did. And so we run into a lot of that. There's a lot of myth making in the South that we run into. Everyone is a major captain or colonel. Yeah, like everyone was an officer. No one was a private. And a lot of guys said they served, and like maybe they did, maybe it was for a couple days. Maybe they were in a militia unit in 1855 and didn't want to say, hey, I didn't actually serve when the Civil War happened. A lot of that to contend with. It can get fun.
And also, so the Union pension records are this incredible gold mine for us. That's how we find out their aliases, when they were trying to hide their service from their moms, all of that. Well, in the South, the Confederate pensions, if you even bothered to apply for them, they were for indigent people, and they collected not the breadth of information because they weren't going to pay them. They didn't have a lot of money to pay them. And so that's probably my biggest disappointment, is that we don't have a Confederate version of the Union pension files, because wow.
Well, they're just like Confederate pensions in general, tracking them down is tough because soldiers could apply for them where they were living after the war, which could be a completely different place. So like if you served in an Alabama regiment and then you moved to Florida after the war, you could apply for a pension in Alabama because that's where you served, or you could apply for a pension in Florida. But a lot of the time, like with Union soldiers, we know that a guy moved from New York to California because of the pension records. We're looking at these files to find out where he moved. With the Confederate records, you're having to kind of work backwards and be like, oh, there's this guy in Florida. Did he once live in Alabama? Like it's a lot more complicated. There's a lot more
and I can't believe
exploration required.
I can't believe how many times these guys moved across the country in the early, 20th century.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
wild. They were
Wild.
living all over the place, and it's hard to keep track of them sometimes.
Interesting. Very interesting. Well, I'm sure there won't be as many questions now about what about my Confederate ancestor?
We're working
So,
on
Email us.
and I would think that if anyone listening has documents in their possession from a Confederate Southern Jewish family, that you might want to see a copy of those because it could be a unique document for you.
Absolutely.
Yes, that would be
Absolutely.
amazing. Yes. And by all means, if you had Confederate ancestors, please email us at roster@shapell.org, because we have this giant list of names we're trying to get into the database. And we may not have your ancestor yet. So don't assume that we do, please. We want to hear from everybody.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to switch a little bit here. And I'm wondering if you could please list specific types of evidence other than descendants that are used to determine if someone is Jewish.
It's a great question.
That's a great question.
Wants to go through the
I
categories.
can start, and you guys can definitely
There you go.
chime in because I'm sure I'll miss something. But we use everything. We use preferably primary source documents, marriage, burial. We use newspaper articles,
Circumcision.
circumcision
We have
records.
a number of those. Not kidding.
Yeah.
Not kidding. That's
We
how
have
we
an
know.
affidavit about a guy who was attending his son's bat mitzvah, or his own. He was saying he knew how old he
Bar
was
mitzvah.
because he knows when his bar mitzvah was.
Right.
And so we have a lot of anecdotal things. We have a category that we consider someone Jewish if their peers told someone that they were Jewish. So we'll have a lot of anecdotes in written affidavits and pension records where we say, oh yes, I remember that soldier, and I remember him because he was the only Jew in our company, and that's why I remember him. So
Diaries too from non-Jewish comrades, things like that, where they mention.
Now, on that one, though, we do have a stipulation. If somebody refers to somebody, say, in a newspaper in an anti-Semitic way, no, we don't consider that to be what we call POJ, proof of Judaism. But if we find additional, evidence that
Records to
says,
back it up.
right. There was a guy, I remember, he was traveling. We were having the hardest time trying to prove him Jewish because he didn't marry Jewish. We couldn't access his birth records because they were from a town in Europe that all the records didn't exist anymore. And he wasn't, we didn't know where he was buried. So we didn't know if that was Jewish or not. And so there was a little tiny blurb in a Mississippi newspaper that was very disparaging of him. I think he was trying to get into like low-level politics. And so somebody was like, we'd never vote for him, blah, blah, blah. And, all this anti-Semitic rhetoric. And we're like, okay, I mean, that could just be name calling. We don't know. Then we ended up finding actual evidence. I think he did end up, we did find where he was buried, and it was a Jewish cemetery. So.
And I'm pretty sure they didn't like that guy because he was helping the reconstruction efforts in this.
That's correct. Yeah.
So
now, one of my favorite stories about how difficult this is. We have a guy, he was an officer. He's buried in Arlington National Cemetery. And that's military honors, go him. He didn't marry Jewish, and we couldn't find his birth records. And so he lived in Washington, D.C. He was fairly prominent. He was involved. He was a member of a lot of German organizations where there were other Jewish members, but there was nothing that was saying he was Jewish. He was traveling in Baltimore for business. And this was in the late 1890s, I believe, when they're still using gas-powered electricity lighting. And there was a gas leak, and he died in his hotel room in Baltimore. But he was a fairly well-known person. So there were all these little snippet obituary, death notices, what in various papers, and it always say share to, and there was this one, and we were scratching our heads about it, and it said that his personal secretary had Colonel Seligsson's body taken to Jacob
Adler.
Right?
Yeah.
Ahern, maybe.
Ahern, that's it.
It was Ahern. Okay, Jacob Ahern's funeral parlor. And it turns out that Jacob Ahern was literally the funeral body preparer for the who's who of Baltimore's Jews. And so his personal secretary wouldn't have known that if he wasn't Jewish. So we were like, okay, we're good. So sometimes it's like 11th hour.
From obscure places.
Yeah, exactly. And our favorite is when they marry and are buried Jewish, because that's easy.
Yeah, that's easy.
Right.
All right. Well, I'm going to keep going.
Okay.
If a descendant is the only source, and let's say the person in question is he marries someone non-Jewish, or there's no other evidence of connection to the Jewish community or a Jewish institution or a Jewish newspaper or something like that. And not to get into a religious debate here, because we're not going to address who is a Jew religiously and defined differently by various denominations. But at what point are they Jewish? If a descendant, for example, is not Jewish, but they refer to this person as Jewish, maybe there is evidence, maybe there's not. I mean, at what point in the family lineage are you defining someone as Jewish to include in the roster?
So we try to use the broadest, most inclusive definitions we can, because we didn't know these people. We don't know who thought they were Jewish, who didn't think they were Jewish, etc. And we want to just include as many people as possible who are connected to the Jewish faith, obviously. So we use the definitions. We do Jewish by Jewish law. So obviously, like traditionally matrilineal lines, that kind of thing. Then we do Jewish by genealogy, and we will accept soldiers who we find parents, grandparents, great grandparents were Jewish. We look back as far as we need to go. I don't think we've gone too much past like a great grandparent that maybe is reaching it, although I don't think we've had to. I don't think we've come across someone who we were like, I think they're Jewish, and if I go just one more generation back, we just haven't been in that situation to have that conversation. But then we do Jewish identified by their peers, and then self-identifying as Jewish. Those are sort of our four broad categories. But when we work with descendants, we try to take their word for what they're saying about their family as much as possible, because obviously you have passed down histories, you have personal documents, things like that. But we do independently corroborate claims as well, just because there are people who are fantastic with their family genealogies, and there are people who are enthusiastic that ancestry has led astray, and it is extremely easy to get, many different Marcus Aarons confused, and some of them are evangelical Baptists. So, you have to.
And also, like some descendants that I've spoken to in the past say, oh, well, my ancestor is Jewish. And I ask, oh, but I'm not. And I'll say, oh, that's great. How do you know that? And they'll say, well, because he's in Wolf. And I'm like, well, Wolf isn't always correct.
The problem.
So that's why we do more. So it depends on, like, do you think your ancestor was Jewish because your entire family is Jewish and always has been, or do you think so for another reason? So it's kind of on a case by case basis, and kind of seeing like, what their connection to their family history is, if this is like a new thing, or if they've always known it forever, or that kind of thing.
We also have a scenario. So this is fun. I was testing this out when I was testing the integration. You can now enter the name Mick Blair, McBlair, in JewishGen's unified database, and you'll get a hit. And it's only going to be from our database, but it turns out that there are these Jewish McBlairs. The mother was Jewish, so they're in by Jewish law. But I was not surprised to see that no other database in your collection had a McBlair come up. So we have, things like that, names don't tell you everything.
Yeah, we have a number.
Also, Henry Moses Judah, right? His father was a rabbi, and he lived his life completely not as a Jew. And we actually had to discuss him because he's one of the highest ranking officers in the Union Army. And when we were talking about this internally, it was like, right, but he's the son of a rabbi, like him living his life as non-Jewish doesn't take away from the fact that he is actually Jewish. With that being said, we do have a family, and we have not put them in the database because we have the diary of the original immigrant of the family. He came over in the 1700s. In his memoir, he told his daughters, do not marry Jews. It will be much easier for you in this country if you are not Jewish. So he actively told his children. Now, the time period addresses what you were asking. So 5 generations later, there's a lot of kids who served in the Civil War, a lot. I feel like there's an intent there. None of them lived a Jewish life. None of the generations lived a Jewish life. So they're not in the database. But like Alex said, we take it on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, so if viewers have a story, maybe someone was Jewish, maybe not, and they're not in the database, but perhaps they fall into this, let's call it the gray area, or you haven't made a decision on the Shapell side, they should reach out to you because you likely have some information or may have had more
Yes.
conversation about
if
why
we
they're
don't
in
have
it or
it, we'll
not.
go find it. So,
Yeah.
Okay.
if you write to us about your ancestors and you're unsure, like we're happy to also go digging, to go looking, etc. We love a great lead.
We do.
Great.
So
Great. And I'm just going to do a little plug here before we open it up to any other questions that came in through the chat. I just want to mention that we have a project on JewishGen's USA Research Division called Shul Records America. It's not a names index to individuals found in synagogue records in America, but it's a finding aid pointing to where those records are located. So I just wanted to encourage the Shapell staff that if you have a list of congregations or documents from congregations and where you're finding them, I would love to have a conversation, or if that's something easily you could pull and send to us to add to Shul Records America, we would greatly appreciate that. And for our viewers, you can search Shul Records America. We are over 650 collections and growing. We have researchers working in major cities at archives at this point, and that is expected to grow. If you know of where any records are, I ask you to reach out and let me know. Ellen Kowitt at JewishGen.org. So with that, we're going to move to Avrami. In closing, I just want to say, I hope that one or all of you apply to the IAJGS conference when the call for proposals comes out shortly to speak in the conference next summer. It'll be held in August in Philadelphia. So I think it would be great for you to be a resource there.
No, count us in. We're there.
All right. Avrami, what do you got? And you're muted.
Okay, hi. Okay, let's see if we have any questions in the chat, in the Q&A. How accurate are the 1910 census records where they asked if you served in the Union Army or Confederate Army?
So I would say they're pretty accurate if they say they did. I have not run into much in terms of situations where if they say they served, they didn't serve. But if they didn't say if there's nothing designated, that means nothing. That does not mean that they did not serve at all.
People who want to write in to you, if they feel they have ancestors who served in the Union or Confederate armies, what's the process?
All you got to do is start the conversation by contacting us at roster, ROSTER, at Shapell, that's SHA1PE2Ls.org. And we'll take it from there. We'll find, even if we have your ancestor, we just want to say hi. Even if we've talked to you previously, reach out, we'll say hi again.
We always love saying hello to people as well.
Exactly.
Yes. Ethan Starr, it's not a question. He just mentions that you already have his ancestor, Samuel Wolf, who is his great-great-grandfather. So you already have him in the system.
Oh my gosh.
Cool.
Let us know what you think of his record. Send us an email.
Send us an email.
And if you haven't proofread it yet, we apologize, and it is coming.
And he had asked earlier about the Kansas State Militia. And so, but it's entirely with that last name, we may not, I'll have to go look at his record. We may not know whether he's Jewish or not yet. So, yeah, we definitely want to hear from you, Ethan, for sure.
A reminder about how many Jews estimated fought for the North or South?
We don't know. Here's a good thing to keep in mind. And Ellen, you were going to talk about keeping the Lynn Berkowitz version of this data. One of the things to keep in mind is you're going to see all the Simon Wolf names in the Shapell roster. However, the important thing is how many of them are actually Jewish. And even more important than that, how many we have a Jewish status of TBD, which means we don't know. They could be, they might not be. We don't know. So
that's why they're in the database. So
yeah, exactly. Right. So
I know.
So for a guesstimate, you did hear 8,000 because what I said is that Wolf listed, and I think it was 8,113 names. Now, what I didn't mention is that of those, we have consolidated over 800 names. What that means is that Wolf listed them, like we had this one guy. He's listed 5 different times in Wolf. He served in three regiments under 4 different names. Like he was just kind of all over the place. There was no way for Wolf to know that it was the same guy, in all these different regiments, or that a guy with this name and guy with that name. There's no way he could have tracked that down. He didn't have the resources that we have. So even Wolf's number isn't 8,000. So I wish I had a number for you, but that's why we're trying to change the conversation, because we feel like it's more important how they served, who they were, what their lives were like before, during, and after the war. These are the important things. I think all 3 of us would say, yes, Jewish participation in the Civil War, it was a thing. And they were officers and they were privates and they deserted and they got promoted. And, so it was the American experience. And I wish we had the kind of numbers to give you, but I just from the chats here, it looks like we've gotten the numbers going up. I just got an email yesterday, the numbers gone up. So yeah,
it's basically a work. It's a work in progress. So you have all accomplished a tremendous amount of work, but it could grow, and more information could actually consolidate people with the same name. So it's in progress. You asked me to comment about Simon Wolf's index that is on JewishGen. It's been on there prior to my time in this role. And it was a consideration that once the Shapell roster launched, that maybe we should take that index down. We talked about it and decided not to, because it's really up to the individual researcher when they find something on JewishGen to analyze that evidence along with their other evidence to determine if something is correct in your family's story or not. Because so much of what Shapell does is based on Wolf and some of his mistakes. We wanted to leave it all there. So if someone disagrees with Shapell and you find someone in the index and you can reason or argue or feel strongly through your family stories that that person is Jewish as defined by Simon Wolf, that is your decision as the end user. And I would, say that's true of anything you find on JewishGen. Just because someone is in one piece of evidence that JewishGen happens to index, JewishGen is just following the index, making that available. We're not telling you if what's in the index is true or not true. So we're leaving Simon Wolf's index on JewishGen. And when you search a name, you may see that the result shows a result with Shapell and with Simon Wolf. So you'll be able to see the Simon Wolf book online. It is digitized, and so it's pretty easy to access. There are a couple of other really great questions. I just want to make sure we squeeze them in. One was, did they have Jewish clergy during the Civil War? And the other was, are there women in the records? Both great questions.
So women, not so far. I would die to find a woman who served. That would be my dream. And when it happens, we will proclaim.
We have one close, maybe, like, wasn't there maybe a Confederate nurse, but she wasn't actually.
Nurse. Yeah, we have some nurses. Like, we have nurses that get mentioned peripherally, but we don't have a way to put them in our database, unfortunately. But those are stories we hope we can tell, like, with future presentations and things like that. In terms of Jewish clergy, that was a huge part of the Civil War. The Union Army started letting in Jewish clergymen after, rabbis and other denominations that weren't Christian, etc., or like traditional Christian, Catholic, they let it in Catholics during the Civil War. That was a huge fight that occurred, and it's the Board of Delegates of Hebrews.
Yeah, the
Might be
American.
missing a word in there.
Yeah.
Petitioned, like there was a huge campaign to petition. They tried to get Rabbi Arnold Fischel to be the first official Jewish chaplain. He never made it, actually. He got sponsored to go help the troops by citizens, and traveling around did not suit him, and they never gave him a commission as an official chaplain. The first official Jewish chaplain who got booted before the rule got changed was actually a liquor dealer, interestingly enough, who read for his synagogue. But that is when that happens. They start allowing Jewish chaplains in during the Civil War. And I think our count is up to 6 Union chaplains. We have 1 Confederate, I think.
One Confederate so far, yeah.
Before we conclude, I'd like to introduce you to Karen Franklin. Karen is, I think everybody knows Karen. She's renowned as an expert, but what she's particularly known for is that she's the director of our new genealogy center at the Museum of Jewish Heritage. And I thought maybe I'd like Karen to say hello if you'd like.
Hello, if you like. Yes.
Hi, Karen. It's nice to see your face after corresponding via email.
Wait, we're not supposed to talk about that publicly. So
I
never
know.
met you
I didn't
before.
say a word. I didn't say a word. I said
Okay.
hello.
Those of you who know JewishGen and what's going on will keep you wondering. And Ellen, thank you very much. That was fabulous. All of you, much appreciated. Here we go.
Okay. If there are no other questions, I think we'll wrap up. I'd like to thank you all. First of all, everybody who's joined us today, we really appreciate you taking the time. I'd like to thank everybody from Shapell. I'd like to thank Ellen for organizing this program. We really appreciate it. What we will do is we will follow up with an email. Once we've loaded the video to our YouTube channel, we will send out a link. In the email will also be the handout. We will also include a link to next week's webinar, also organized by Ellen. That continues our series on researching Jewish families in America. And next week's topic will be on resources in the Lake Erie region. So if you have family in that area, we hope that you will join us as well. We thank you all again, and we wish you a wonderful rest of the week. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Much.
Bye-bye.